I'm Randy Horton, Chief Solutions Officer at Orthogonal. Thanks for logging in today and joining us for our monthly Orthogonal webinar. This month, the topic is MedTech Ecosystem Design Controls. Uh, there's a lot of energy, I will say, among our panelists on this, and this is going to be a great discussion, which is also fortuitous because if you can hear my voice, I've lost it mostly. So, we do these webinars monthly. We look for feedback from you on what makes them better. If we contact you, please let us know what you would like different on this webinar in the future or in future ones. And the rest for orthogonal, I think Bernhard Kapp, our CEO, is going to explain. But first, let me just introduce our panelists for the day. So we have Carl Washburn from Eli Lilly. Carl, you want to maybe introduce, give a few seconds about yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. And I live in Indianapolis. I've been with Eli Lilly for 11 years. Before Eli Lilly, I worked with Johnson and Johnson. And Eli Lilly, we have certainly had experience or are developing, interoperable systems that include software as a medical device, software in a medical device, medical devices themselves and also connected to IT systems. So very honored to be as part of this great panel. Thank you.
Welcome. We're glad to have you. And it was really interesting recently that you were saying after working at J&J and Eli Lilly, you feel like you gotta get out of the startups and go to some big companies.
I know,
So,
right? Exactly.
okay. Megan Graham.
Yes, thank you. I'm Megan Graham, VP of Quality and Regulatory at Orthogonal. I come from long history in the medical device industry, starting at the big companies and then moving later into helping startups get their products on the market and navigate that regulatory pathway, but also the quality pathway. So this topic is near and dear to my heart. It's really something that all of our clients and all of the industry faces on a regular basis as they start incorporating more and more digital into their portfolio. So thanks for being here.
And I'm going to hand it off to our CEO, Bernhard Kappa, with one quick note. Send your comments early and often. I will try to seed them into the discussion as we go. There's some slides, but this is really going to be a back and forth session. I think even more so than a lot of our other ones. So, but we are looking out and we do want to hear from you with your thoughts, questions, or complete disagreement with anything we're saying. Bernhard Kappa.
Perfect. Let me share this thing as a slideshow. Hopefully everyone can see this. So let me just start a little bit about orthogonal. Obviously, some of you know us well, but others don't. So we're a consulting company. We believe in improving patient outcomes faster. We are all about applying fast feedback loops to quality practices for software as a medical device, AI algorithms, and then the sort of digital ecosystems around connected devices. And we're really about building better processes, tools, and patterns that help our customers launch and evolve their products faster while increasing safety, compliance, engagement, and effectiveness. We've been doing this for over 15 years. We have been doing SAMD work for over 10 years with our clients, both developing products for them and helping them build out their capabilities. Especially over the last couple of years, a lot of what we've been doing has been accelerated by agentic AI, both in our own SDLC and for our customers. This has really increased the speed as well as the effectiveness and kind of reducing errors and issues and increasing compliance. We're also heavily involved in regulations and in standards and such, including now new work in the agentic AI space. Work with a lot of venture-backed startups. We love working with startups because of how fast they can move. But we also do a lot of work with enterprise medical device companies where we help them really build out lean, mean SAMD machines, and then pharma, tech, and consumer as well. We work with folks in a few different ways. We will build, do end-to-end SAMD, AIMD, medical device ecosystem development. We do a lot of co-building where we bring our best practices in, so that internal teams can work better while we're developing things. And then we do, especially for large companies, a lot of transformation work, applying the methodology to enable clients to innovate 2 to 3 times faster, something that's accelerating even more now with agentic AI. So digital ecosystems, right? A lot of this is what is developed over the last, I don't know, 5, 10 years, is that, rather than having standalone devices, we have devices that are connected, and we have other parts of the system that are very important, but that are not medical device. And in some of the areas that we're working in, such as, say, the surgical suite, that has changed dramatically, so that all of these things that used to be maybe not so connected, surgical robots, surgical planning, et cetera, are now connected, and really providing greater value and convenience, and are more integrated in for clinicians and patients. So a lot of decisions are being made in that space and in many others, not just based on the device itself, but everything else around it. Um, so so working on this and moving quickly is really, really, is very important, is a big competitive advantage for those who can do that. And so one of the challenges here, for a lot of companies, is how they think about design controls for this. Just because something is a medical device, or some parts of the system are a medical device, does not mean everything needs to be uh, have the same design controls as, say, a class 3 implanted device. So getting the architecture of the system right is very important. I will stop there. We've got some more slides after this, but Randy, do you have any prompts or questions you'd like to ask?
Yeah, so Bernard, is the ecosystem opportunity slash challenge, is that a brand new thing, or is it more an evolution, or we've kind of, turned the dial up to 11, to try and
It's
do
an
it?
evolution, right? I think there are areas where this has been the challenge for quite some time. If you look at, say, the diabetes space, right, these have been connected ecosystems for a long time. Um, but in general, right, everything is becoming more connected in the world, uh, and we are relying more and more on software and AI, et cetera, et cetera. This is applying in the medical device field as much as in other areas. It's happened faster in some areas, but other areas, like the surgical suite, where this was not the basis of competition previously, are now the basis of competition. We're seeing this again, happen more rapidly throughout the medical device space.
So diabetes was a bit of the canary in the coal mine for where things were
Yeah.
heading.
Mhm.
Um, well, with that, maybe it makes sense to go over to Carl, our OG in the diabetes space, to uh, to talk a little bit about. It'd be great to hear your perspective on this as somebody who's been doing this a while. In general, what are some of your key thoughts for the rest of the world as we now learn to do what you've been doing for a while?
Yeah, I like the word ecosystem because it's this bucket you can throw anything and everything into. But the challenge is, what regulatory pathway are you following? And are you crossing lanes? I'm just thinking of the freeway. There's the slow lane, the fast lane, and then there's the emergency lane over on the right. And in some respect, you can classify software projects and device projects into lanes based on the rigor and the requirements for regulatory review and approval. And so if you look at the ecosystem, you could start with, as you said, Bernhard, software as a medical device. But off of that, you can throw in a physical device that has software in a medical device, and then it's communicating with software as a medical device, and then that can be communicating with a IT system that does not require the rigor of medical device development, but should be connected to this other ecosystem. And so the question becomes, well, how do you put all of this together? What are the boundaries of those systems? How do these systems communicate with each other? And what regulatory rigor and pathway should you choose to be in full compliance with your regulatory requirements? I'm going to stop there and let you ask any follow-ups.
Randy, you're on mute.
Megan, let's hear your take on this.
Yeah, I love that. I think what's really interesting about the question is that most companies, I think, start with the question, is it device or is it not a device? And I think what Carl really spoke to um, is, and that what the way I think about it is that's a question, but there's also kind of what's the technical purpose of this piece in this overall ecosystem, and then what's the risk profile? And so though, the regulatory pathway and the risk profile, they are congruent, right? They go together, but they're not the same question. So when you're thinking about, you know, the system performing its overall function, the whole ecosystem working together, thinking about how do we know that it's serving its purpose effectively over time? And that's where you really start getting into the design controls. One question is, what are the minimum design controls that are required? But the other question is, what's really, and that's the rigor piece of it, what's really required to make sure this piece of the ecosystem is doing what it's supposed to do well?
Megan,
So
I'm
those
sorry,
two,
I'm interrupting. Go ahead, finish.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, just adding on to your comments, even in the medical device classification,
mhm,
there's different classifications within a medical
right,
device. So there could be, class one, class two, class three, and then based on IEC 62304, there's a
right.
software safety class. Each of those could have varying levels of rigor. And so probably one of the, most helpful things that we've done at Lilly is early on, we have clarified our procedural guidance, and each component of this ecosystem
Yeah,
has to have a very clear and written regulatory classification. So we have a process. We say, hey, here's a piece of the ecosystem, and we go to regulatory, and they have their own process for looking at, like you said, Megan, what's the intended use? And based on that, they do a official classification as class one, class two, or class three, or not a medical device. But the best part of that is a controlled document. And so instead of being a hallway conversation that changes every 5 minutes and having endless arguments over, oh, there's a class one, class two, we have a document we can go to and said, hey, that's the classification that you submitted. And if you are changing the features, back to Bernhard, the point you're making, and you increase the capabilities and you uplift the device classification, well, you are also responsible for a higher level of rigor under design controls. And I think that's where the magic comes is, hey, as long as we're very clear on what something has been classified and we follow those regulatory requirements, we are in the green, doing the right thing for the right reason, and we have a clear audit trail why we're doing that. I'll stop that, and then Megan, I'd love to hear your comments to what
yeah,
I just said.
abs absolutely. And I like the idea, like the point is the way I think about it, being very intentional. And
Yeah,
even like what is the ecosystem, right? when we think about doing risk analysis and we think about defining what the product is, where are the boundaries of the product itself?
Right. Thank you.
And like where's that system level? You have to have that system level thinking and be able to say this piece does this piece does this piece. What are those interfaces? How do they work together? And being very, very intentional about that and having a pathway for change over time. Because
So,
it's regulatory classification can change or other things can change. So
And
yeah.
may go
let's
ahead.
dig in on that a little bit more. And we've got uh, a couple of things that I think are good tools to help people to think about this as we move forward. Um, I think like one of the key things, right? You can sort of say no design controls because it's not a medical device. Highest level design controls for everything, right? And there's
Hmm.
that last one. I know some people have done that, but it really is very problematic when you're doing ecosystems, right? You really want to avoid the monolith because if you treat everything as a single monolithic medical device,
Yeah.
you're going to slow down development. You're going to very much slow down your release cadence. It's you're going to limit the scalability, maintenance cost, et cetera. All of these things are going to go up. And certainly the FDA actively discourages this approach, right? If under those circumstances, any change you make, you're going to do a new filing with the FDA, et cetera. And the FDA does not want that. And that's why they've put out a lot of guidance around how you handle some of these types of things. But so there's the cost of under engineering, but also the cost of over engineering um, when you have this. The FDA has actually and to has done a lot in terms of uh, kind of some good guidance around this that is very helpful in terms of how to think about this. Maybe we can go and look at those key building blocks, both in terms of standards and frameworks that help you navigate sort of what level of design controls you should have for these different ones. Um, Key FDA guidance here, the multiple function device guidance, interoperability guidance, and cybersecurity guidance. Right. I think there are other things. There's certainly PCCP, when to file for software, all of these things that go around this. But maybe we can talk about these a little bit. These are really good building blocks. Um, do you want to talk through the interoperability guide? Sorry, the multiple function device guidance first?
Sure. Sure. Um,
Okay.
yeah, I think one of the areas of multiple function device is it really speaks to, I always like to think about architecture in terms of there's a technical architecture, there's also a regulatory architecture. And I think the multi-function device approach is thinking about what are your different distinct um, products, if you will, within that ecosystem so that you can do the regulatory device classification. You can start building out what is the system, what are the boundaries. And then your technical architecture really sits under there so that you've got these modules that you break in, what the device functions do into natural modules that are very aligned with your technical architecture. I'm curious,
Yeah.
Carl, if you've done like what some learnings are from Lilly, because you guys have been doing this for a while, and how have you approached the multifunction device or type of guidance?
Yeah, it's actually the second bullet on your slide, the interoperability guidance, because that's where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
Because if you have a non-medical device connected to a medical device, and they're both software systems, uh, it's very important to clarify what that interoperability and data exchange of data is, to what standard do you build that to? And so
Hmm.
you have to be very intentional what that is. And then if you have different groups developing that, which you always do, whether they're internal and external or two internal groups, it's important to clarify who's responsible for the production equivalent end-to-end testing and not just assume it's going to be done and everyone's will cooperate. Somebody has to be in the plan, in the plan, the validation plan and verification plan, who's going to sign on the line that this thing is working together properly. And back to interoperability guidance, what are the risks from having two systems connected, and are those assessed, and how are those to be assessed? And I think that's the most important part of today's call is, okay, if we're looking at this interoperable system or this ecosystem, it's those boundaries, how you define them and how you plan for that interoperability to work and ensure that you are following regulatory guidelines. I think those are the three key points to an ecosystem. I'm going to stop there. And Bernhard, I want to hear your opinion. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think they're sort of like kind of three building blocks that work together, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
multiple function device guidance tells you, hey, you can draw boundaries around you if you have
Yeah.
a system, a device, whatever you want to call it. Um, uh, you can draw boundaries around what is the medical device and what is not medical device. And it says, but you need to sort of manage the dependencies, right? It doesn't necessarily tell you how, but you want to be able to show that the non-device functions that you've drawn outside of your device boundary uh, are the risks of those are managed, or that you're not going to get cascading risks from that. So that sort of it tells you what you need to do, but not necessarily how. Whereas the interoperability guidance, which you can apply to interoperable medical devices, but also you can extend that and apply that to non-device systems, other systems that you're integrating in with, where again, what you need to do is look at the surfacing the risks. What are the risks for an interoperator? So transparent transparency on what are the failure modes of the subsystem you're interoperating with, and that's residual risk for the interoperator to mitigate on their side. If you think about that in terms of architecture, and you think about how cloud services and systems are built, that's actually what, when we say cloud native architecture, that's what one of the big key things about cloud native architecture is transparent failure modes and ways that systems become more robust and resilient by managing those things. So the interoperability guidance as a pattern is not just something that applies to interoperable medical devices, but the patterns from that really apply to how you develop good systems in the first place. And then if you look at IEC 62304 and the concept of software segregation, it's the same type of thing. You are trying to uh, decompose your system both based on risk, and then segregation is a way or a set of techniques that you're using to avoid cascading failures, where one part of your system overall will cause cascading failures in the rest of the system. So those three things work really well together as patterns, and are key to making sense of an ecosystem and knowing where you should put your emphasis in terms of design controls.
Bernhard, I have a question that just from a statement that you made, I found really interesting, and said that some organizations, if they have an ecosystem, they do design controls at the highest level of rigor for every single component within the ecosystem. And that's what got me thinking is that, hey, if you do not have these different designed pathways for the medical device classification, the safety classification, and how it's all connected together, maybe they do that just because out of being conservative and it's the easiest pathway for one project. And that's my question to you. If you just have one project and thinking that's all we're ever going to do, it may be just as efficient to develop under the highest level of regulatory compliance for the entire project versus splitting it out. What are your thoughts between the two if you're just doing one project? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I guess the question is if it's one project and it's not connected,
Yeah,
right? I mean, so it's one
right.
product and it's really just, it's there is no ecosystem, right?
Hmm.
Then sure, right?
Okay. Yeah.
That makes sense, but because you don't have need for anything else other than that. I would say even within that, right, there are um chances are within that device, there are parts of the device that are where there is less patient risk and
Yeah.
maybe more
Hmm.
need to change, right? This all comes down to how quickly do you need to update and change this, and how much value
Exactly.
is
Thank
there
you.
in the
Yep.
ecosystem overall? So even if it's a single device,
The
if there is
maintenance,
more around
you'll
that,
be killed
the
on the
maintenance,
maintenance. Yeah.
you will get killed on maintenance. That's right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And I would also add sometimes organizations conflate rigor with documentation and like the compliance. So part of documenting is the engineering. You're thinking through what are you doing, why are you doing it, and everything. But sometimes organizations conflate those two. And more documentation does not mean better quality. Better quality means better quality. So that's another challenge for organizations thinking about their system and their overall ecosystem and how they want to progress when they have a medical device in the mix.
I mean,
Megan,
we've seen we've seen this before with in particular companies that are kind of moving from being standalone devices to
Hmm.
having more ecosystems, right?
Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
so there's one, company we've worked for, division of a large company, where at the outset they had no SOPs for dealing with
Yeah.
non-device functions whatsoever.
Hmm.
So the question is, do we do anything, or do we
Right.
just sort of do
Exactly.
treat it as
Yeah.
if it's a medical device? And
Right.
then within the medical device side of it, there was a basically there were risk management SOPs that sort of, there was a decision tree, and pretty much everything led to software safety classification C, no matter what. It was kind of like,
Yeah.
so there was definitely it was a straitjacket for that, and they needed to change those things, among other things, to actually be able to do anything on the ecosystem side.
Well, and
Yeah.
that's
And
a reflection of the process of the classification process too. Unless the correct answer was everything that came out of it should be Class C. That's kind of if you know the if you're always getting the same result when you're supposed to get three different potential results, I think that's an opportunity to look at that classification scheme too. And then I think we have a question from the audience if we're ready for that. Um, so really, really good question. The difference between modular design, I was describing that regulatory architecture, and just a good solution architecture. I think what it is uh, two different views of the same concept. So when you're thinking about your solution architecture, you're usually thinking about technically what does it need to do to solve the user needs, perform its mission, that kind of a thing. The regulatory architecture view, that multifunction piece is okay, now for that functionality, uh, what are the additional questions of what are the regulatory requirements? So what's the regulatory classification? And however you package the, draw that system boundary, whatever is contained in there, it's going to go to the highest classification that's within that system. So you've got a list of functions that are device and non-device for every, you know, software, let's say product, whatever the highest one, that's the highest. But also thinking about the change, and we talked about that change. If I make a change to this part of the system versus this other part of the system, what's the impact from a criticality perspective, and what's the impact from a regulatory perspective? So if I'm changing things that are administrative in nature, making sure that the system is running, the framework is such that I probably don't have to go back and do another regulatory cycle. I should be able to scale my rigor up and down and the type of rigor, what I do, so that that change doesn't impact the overall system. If I'm adding an indication, I'm going to have to go back, and I need to be able to distinguish that within my process. My process needs to be effective enough to distinguish that type of system. So if I'm looking at it from a regulatory perspective, I'm looking at what's the actual boundary of the system in terms of how that product's delivered, and what's it going to take to, if I make a change, what does that look like? And those are two different questions looking at the same architecture. And if you have both of those perspectives so that it's doing the product, it's meeting the needs, you can architect, naturally the way you would do from a system or engineering or software engineering perspective. And then you add on the regulatory piece, you're probably um, in the right zone, probably in the sweet spot, so that you're thinking about it from both ways. So that's how I would address it. Hopefully that answered the question, address the question.
Yeah, I would say, right, the your when you think about software architecture or system architecture, right, those it's answering a number of different questions.
Mm.
Your let's call it regulatory architecture is kind of at the highest level, but then you have specific ways that you're answering those things with your architecture at kind of at four different levels of that, and particular ways that there are different ways to answer the questions that you need to answer in your regulatory architecture.
Exactly. And when you're developing those documents, and you're thinking about your rigor, the regulatory piece is answering the question, point of view is answering the question, how am I demonstrating that this is safe and effective at every stage of development? And so that regulatory architecture is the top level for positioning that, answering that question.
Yeah.
You can go back and finish up this, excuse me, finish up the slide, the other points on the right-hand side of the slide you were going through of our foundations to
Oh,
build.
sorry. Back here in terms of the other things. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think obviously IEC 62304 we talked about. I think the predetermined change control plans again is another tool or mechanism you have within that for device functionality, for kind of managing change. It's a little bit you have to say ahead of time, here are the types of changes and here's why this is not going to change the nature of the medical device product, the indications, etc. And it's not going to increase patient risk, but you have a little bit more freedom with PCCPs than you would with sort of previous software, when you have to file, when you don't have to file, right? So it's not carte blanche, because it does have to be very risk controlled and predetermined changes, but those are additional things that you have there. And then TR 115 is actually, I think, another key part of this. TR 115 is around cloud computing, but again, I always look at this in terms of patterns and paradigms. And the paradigm here is, as with many systems that are not fully in your control, this is about how you manage indirect control and dependencies across your overall architecture. So you know that in cloud computing, there are lots of changes underneath the hood, but there are again there is transparency of failure modes, residual risk, and lots that is part of those systems for robustness, resilience, etc. And so it's a different way of managing things when things aren't fully in your control. And so that is another piece that I think applies both mobile to cloud and probably to things like agentic AI based on LLMs. Although that particular part in medical device is still to be determined, but I think it's probably a metaphor that helps us a lot with those types of things when you're building out ecosystems.
This is probably a good time to dive into our case study.
Yeah, so I think right, just sort of summarizing, right? You want to compose the system intentionally, map out the boundaries, determine the modules, what requires what level of design control, and then again, in general, if you were doing a medical device or not, this concept of modularity, orthogonality, good modern system design is all about residual risk, transparent failure modes, and handling those things at both sides, being very robust and intentional about that. That is how Amazon has many services that are, or Microsoft or Google, many services that interact with each other, and the whole thing doesn't fall apart, even though there are thousands of changes happening every day. Software segregation is there's a set of techniques that you can use to sort of to kind of look through the system and actually demonstrate that you are actually separating those risks and that you don't get cascading failures. And the one thing that's a little bit different here is around cybersecurity, right? The one piece of the entire thing where drawing boundaries uh, is is less useful and valuable is in cybersecurity. And the FDA, if you look at, in particular, the multiple function device guidance and all kinds of things around cybersecurity, and in general how we deal with cybersecurity, it's not easy to segregate there. And so this is the kind of thing that you need to look at from a design control perspective, cybersecurity design controls system wide, right? So
Yeah,
different
this,
parts of the system are going to need different levels of design controls, but just about everything is going to need cybersecurity.
yeah, Bernhard, thank you for the slide. As you had cybersecurity on the prior slide, I was thinking in my head, hey, system composition and software segregation, you can apply different design controls based on both of those criteria. But cybersecurity, it's kind of covers the whole system. I'm not quite sure how you could have different level of control. So thank you for
Nope, you
pointing
can't.
that out on the slide. Yeah, thank you.
So a way to to think about this is I like to kind of visualize these things. It's
Hmm.
at a high level, right? And you can if you think about an ecosystem, right? And so here's a diabetes therapy system, right? And one way to group this here, in this case, we're talking about things where we have both US and EU classification, right? So class 3, class 2, 2B in Europe, 2A, then non-device, or class 2A in Europe, pure non-device, and then software safety classifications within particular devices as well. Where cybersecurity applies, where at least in the US, you have the concept of MDDS and CDSS, where you might need to also be very careful about what trips you into device and what is outside of device. Good machine learning practices and interoperability kind of things strictly defined, right? So, in this case, this is a system where I've got an infusion pump, I've got a CGM, I've got a blood glucose meter, I've got a controller for, again, this is a system that where I have interoperability between the CGM and the insulin pump. And I've got a bunch of features within the patient application. I also have a share app for caregivers. I've got a pump demo app. In the web browser, I've got a patient web app. I've got an healthcare provider web app, and then I've got cloud infrastructure with a whole bunch of other things in their third-party app interfaces, EMR integration, et cetera. And so understanding for each of those at a high level, what are the requirements here? What are the regulatory and guidance that we're applying to those things is important. And then this is one level of a view of it, but you can imagine where there are interfaces and interdependencies between these things that you need to then have another level of architecture that goes through and looks at those and looks at the interoperability between these different systems and subsystems. Not necessarily from the interoperability guidance strictly applied, but from the concept of tier one dependencies and transparent failure modes and risk management.
Yeah, this is really a helpful chart. Thank you for the thought that you put into it, Bernhard. Where would you put a medication reminder on a mobile phone? I think food, sleep, exercise, sleep logging, or alerts somewhere in that area. Is that right?
Yeah. So it depends on the nature of it, right? What's the nature of the alerts and medication reminders? You, I, the question of whether those medication reminders are a medical device or not, that's probably what's the current interpretation
Yeah, I know, right?
of the FDA on that, right?
Yeah.
Some of this is something, and that's the other part that I think is important to realize here. Some of this may be different by jurisdiction as well. And so, again, this is a visual representation of this, but a lot of this is the kind of thing where I am a big proponent, or we are big proponents of everything as code. So architecture as code,
Yeah.
testing as code, requirements as code, et cetera, et cetera. The one thing that allows you to do is have different views on things as well. So that you can say, okay, in these jurisdictions, it's this, so therefore we have to apply all of this. And that is the kind of thing that now, if you have all of that as code, and that means it's machine readable as well as human readable, that is where all your AI agents can really come in, and you can say, oh, guess what? We're about to change this, or this regulation changed in this jurisdiction. Right. Here is what that looks like for different systems components, and that's the kind of thing that then you can automatically surface and have alerts for your team on that make the job a lot easier, especially when you have global systems, right? And you're doing things in many jurisdictions.
Thank you.
One of the things I alluded to here, right, is these are all different building blocks that allow you, when you put them together, to kind of move more quickly. So I think of the digital ecosystem design controls, which is kind of what we're talking about here, as one part of that. If you have that sort of modular cloud native architecture, and that's shorthand for uh, modular components with very sort of robust failure modes, but also transparent failure modes and ways for other parts of the system to detect and to mitigate the risks of those things. The ability to kind of scale that out. And then kind of having everything in a way that is both human and machine readable as part of your system. Um, and then a data strategy and the AI factory as part of that. What we're seeing now is when you have all of these things in place, we are seeing tremendous value out of AI agents deployed as part of your process, right?
Mhm.
Um, if you know that architecturally you are looking to do software segregation, you can, your architecture agents, as well as your testing agents, et cetera, can help you very much deploy segregation patterns. And then the important thing about segregation is not just, oh yeah, that looks right, but how do you actually then demonstrate that your segregation is effective? Which is again, a lot of that is by testing things breaking, etc., and what happens when those things happen. That is something that the agents can really help you orchestrate around this. So this process already makes things easier, but there is a lot of machinery to it, obviously. But with agentic AI, that becomes a very fast process and also one where you get alerts much, much earlier, and you get alerts you probably didn't get when you were relying on, let's say, 50 disconnected experts on different jurisdictions that aren't directly involved in your product development. When you put all that together, you can move way, way faster. So this is one of the digital ecosystem design controls, and the kind of regulatory architecture is a key part of that allows you to do this quicker. But it's made more powerful when you have the other parts of the system together as well.
Megan, we had an audience question if you could take it.
Sure. Was this about, so there was a question about when do you run this by the FDA? Would you take a diagram with this about then? Do you do it at a submission earlier? That's a whole other topic on regulatory strategy. You'd never go to a pre-sub with asking the FDA to classify your device, but it might be part of your defensible position. So you're going to think about, and I would say this goes for any regulatory agency, not just FDA. You're going to want to do your homework and understand those 2 points that we talked about. What's your solution architecture, but also what's your regulatory architecture, and how are you positioning the particular product? What is your intended use, that kind of thing. Then the FDA regulatory agency is going to care about those things, but also how your system, your particular product, operates in the bigger picture, and what are the risks and how are you addressing those. It's incredibly important that you are intentional and proactive to appropriately classify the different portions of your system. If you come to the FDA, for example, and say, I think this is a medical device and here's what it is, and they disagree, they might say, no, this is not a medical device, and turn you away. There's also a different pathway to get a specific formal decision from the FDA. But in terms of your, what's my story here and how can I prove it? it's the understanding those different boundaries and then vetting it, right? How does the data flow? How does the functionality flow through the system? And where does it actually touch? We've had clients that we've worked with who've struggled with this, where, okay, I'd like to be able to draw this nice picture and these boundaries, but when we start looking at how does the functionality actually flow through the system, well, you're sending medical device data through parts of your system that you're calling not a medical device, but they're not really, maybe they're not standalone, but you're using them in that way. So that's where the rubber hits the road.
And
And it's really, really important to have that distinction.
and I think it's not a one size fits all, right? Really, you do have to look at what impacts the effectiveness of your device and the risk for your medical device, right? So in some cases, you may have a mobile app and you can and it's really um what's happening in the mobile app is it's connecting via Bluetooth, it is displaying things, it is straightforward software functionality on the mobile application, and the dependencies on the operating system and everything else are not so great, right? And it's easy to test and manage that. You have a different system where perhaps I have an AI algorithm that is sitting in the mobile app, and that AI algorithm does have dependencies on floating point calculation, and there are going to be differences in the GPU in on the smartphone that may have an effect on that. So in that case, you care a lot more about how do I manage the risk of that and how do I show that even if I have X number of different GPUs or a new GPU that comes in, that the risk of on that front on for the algorithm is um, is low enough and it can be controlled. You go to the next level and you have some kind of an algorithm in your mobile app that leverages the images from the smartphone camera to do a diagnostic of some kind. Now you have dependencies on the smartphone camera, the lighting, the processing of raw images within the operating system, etc., and what you're going to have, how you draw the boundary and how you manage the risk of that interoperability to those other parts of the system is a lot higher, and you should be prepared when you're talking to the FDA about that. Here is how we're doing that. Here's how we're testing that. Here's what that looks like, either as standalone studies, bench studies, or as part of your clinical trial. Right? That's part of the analysis you have to do. It's in each of those cases, the story you're telling and how you're actually managing those risks is going to be different.
We're at the point where we need to start wrapping up, but let me pose one last question, starting with Carl.
Of course.
Would you agree or disagree, and why, with the statement that ecosystem design controls are very much a team sport?
Oh, absolutely. They are the definition of a team sport because there's no single team that can develop an entire ecosystem. No one has the expertise or the bandwidth to put together an entire ecosystem. And so, just like as Megan, you were alluding to your regulatory strategy, I think that all of these documents need to be aware of each other, speak to each other, reference each other, and play nice. And those rules hold true for human beings. We need to work with each other and understand what each other's issues are, and be respectful of what the challenges are, and take a team approach to resolving those together. And I think that in many ways, the same rules of good governance for documents apply to human interactions as well. And and Megan, I'll let you respond to in any of that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that and completely agree. I think it keeps going back to you're not going to develop a robust solution with one point of view. It really, the team sport is the point, having those different points of view, thinking about, how can it work? How can it fail? How do we, what's the purpose of it? What problem is this system trying to solve? All those types of things factor in to building a great product. And it's very challenging to break that down into, specific, like what are our operational processes to actually make that happen consistently over time. And also sometimes I do think the human element gets missed. So there's quite a bit we like to do technically, but the human and just having the critical thinking, the different points of view. So I think that's incredibly important in developing anything, any kind of product.
Yeah,
So.
I think when we're doing these kinds of things, right, there it is if all you as kind of an individual contributor have is kind of, here's my little bounded, this is what I know about, and someone over here knows something else about this, and someone knows about this. Uh, those Venn diagrams may not intersect, and so part of the challenge here is certainly understanding enough about each other's domains as you're going through this, and then being able to bridge that between different folks, because it does, you know, someone may know software architecture and patterns really well, but does not know clinical risk management, may not know all of the regulatory things as part of that. Somewhere on the quality side may not know kind of, the software side of things, and those types of things. So it all has to be very well communicated together. And then when you are dealing with third parties as well, again, having good quality agreements and really sort of being able to work well together on those interoperability risks is a key part of it as well. So partnering correctly makes sense too.
Randy, you're muted.
One last closing point for each of you. If somebody gets off this call and says, OMG, we need to get on ecosystem design controls right away. Step one for you is what? What should you do as soon as you get off this webinar? Let's start with Bernard.
Oh, call orthogonal, obviously. I mean, look, you set me up for that, but really, I think you've got to assess where you're at right now, right? What's kind of your current state, and why do you need to do this, right? That's the first thing. What are the goals? What are you not doing now, and how big is that gap? Both in terms of just looking at it internally, but also looking at your competitors, how fast you're moving or need to move as part of what you're doing. What is the value of the ecosystem for you? What's the strategic value, and then what should your strategy be around? That's the first thing. After that, you can look at, okay, what are my gaps to the best practices, and which ones do I actually need to what do I need to do first as part of that, and how far do I need to go? Not everyone needs to be moving super super fast. If you're early stage and you don't have the scale, and you're really not even at the point where you have an ecosystem, there's some easy things you can do at the beginning, but really it's a question of understanding the gap, and then having a roadmap for driving towards towards that sweet spot.
Megan, we're down to like 90 seconds.
Yes, yes, no, okay. One thing, if you're thinking about an ecosystem, and you're thinking about applying design controls, my first thing I would do is two parts. Define your system. What does it do? What are all the different pieces that fit together? And what problem are you trying to solve? So, like, what's the ultimate goal? Like, what are you trying to do with it so that you have the right context for even starting?
Solve the right problem. Carl, bring it home for us.
I was inspired by Megan's comments earlier when she talked about a regulatory roadmap or regulatory assessment. I want to add to that and say a lot of these things are project based, and you can look at a project and say, actually, we need to do a QMS roadmap or a QMS assessment. Back to the point you made, Randy, saying, hey, if we're going to have this ecosystem, we need to put in quality agreements. Let's go work on developing those. Or we need to have interoperability SOPs or interoperability risk management and interoperability processes. Or, hey, we need to go develop a lightweight IT level QMS for this information system we're connecting. And so I think that's the assessment is look at the project you're going to be working on. And it's pretty easy to figure out where the gaps are and develop those a plan to fill those gaps in your QMS to meet the requirements of the project you're anticipating. And I'll stop with that.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Please feel to reach out to us. We're happy to talk about these things in more detail, and we will see you back next month for our next webinar. And thank you, Carl, very much for joining on Megan and Bernhard and I.
Thank you,
Thanks a lot,
Carl.
everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.